The 1920s, or Roaring Twenties as they're called, brought about a lot of change. Even though there were all these changes, there were still a lot of people that resisted these changes in each of the pegs. A political example of this resistance is Al Smith. Al Smith was a progressive leader who opposed prohibition and other such changes that occurred in the era. He ran for president in the 1928 election against Herbert Hoover, and although he didn't win, he got over 40% of the votes, which showed that although all these changes were going on, people were still resistant to it. The 1920s also saw economic resistance from farmers. During World War I, because of all the fighting in Europe, produce was high in demand and American farmers encountered very little competition. After the war, new technology in farming and the return of European farmers caused an overabundance in produce. This created a food surplus which lowered the prices of produce to the point where farmers could no longer support themselves. President Hoover tried to help the farmers by creating the Agricultural Act and the Federal Farm Board. Hoover gave the Federal Farm Board a $500 million budget to buy surpluses of cotton and grain to support the farmers and raise the price of produce. However, the farmers produced produce faster than the government was able to buy it from them, so they overran the budget, and that made prices even worse, and from then on, they just kind of hated the government for everything. Cultural resistance to change is the Scopes Trial. The Scopes Trial, formerly known as the State of Tennessee versus John Thomas Scopes and commonly referred to as the Scopes Monkey Trial, was a case in which a substitute biology teacher taught Darwin's theory of evolution, which violated the Butler Law, which prohibited the teaching of human evolution. This turned into a huge federal case of science versus religion. The court gave him a fine of $100 for violating the law, thus showing that even though there were new modernistic theories, they still refused to change. A social example of resistance to change in the 1920s were the eugenics. The eugenics believed that African Americans were unfit to be called equal. They believed that their DNA showed that they shouldn't be in the same ranks as the white men. This was a resistance since the 1920s showed a push towards equal rights for everyone. Another example of resistance against social institutions was the Ku Klux Klan. The KKK was a radical racist group who constantly terrorized African Americans by lynching and burnings. They were a keen example of resistance to change because they refused to accept black rights and modernist theories. This has been Resistance to Change in the 1920s. If you liked the video, tell us thanks.